The year is 2016. Horror games have seen somewhat of a resurgence on the PC, thanks to games like Amnesia, Outlast, Alien Isolation, and Five Nights at Freddy's in recent years. Still, the focus in a lot of these games is more about fear through helplessness rather than survival horror design, which had been the dominant factor in previous generations of horror thanks to series like Resident Evil. But Resident Evil didn't exactly seem concerned with filling that niche anymore. Whether the recent games in the series were of quality or not didn't matter. All that mattered to most fans of the series was that they weren't survival horror. Even games like Revelations never quite jumped all the way back into what so many fans were lusting for. PT had made an enormous splash in 2014 though, showing everyone what AAA horror could look like in the modern age. It was unsettling, disturbing, and was really great at getting under the player's skin without relying on cheap tactics like musical stings and jump scares, all while looking like a big budget affair. But most importantly, it had signaled the return of Silent Hill, the only series to really ever compete with Resident Evil in terms of mindshare. Unfortunately, the elation that came with this new work was deflated quickly after Kojima and Konami had their famous falling out. Everything seemed to crumble and the project was eventually cancelled. This was an enormous blow to fans of horror games everywhere. Not long afterward, though, a solution cropped up from an unexpected place. Capcom. In 2015, they'd shown the press a VR demo entitled Kitchen, which showed to some extent that they were interested in making some more traditionally horrific content. The next E3 saw the release of a demo to the general public, known as Beginning Hour. This release was a pretty large surprise to most people, and only continued to be more surprising as people started playing it and realized that it was actually pretty good. Though it seemed to take a lot of cues from PT, Beginning Hour was still largely satisfying to many people. It was horrifying in its own ways. Was this truly the direction Resident Evil would be going for its next installment? Beginning Hour takes place in what would later be known as the guest house section of the final game. A lot of the design decisions made here are mirrored in the final game. The setting, the first-person perspective, the filmic look, the emphasis on slow gameplay, puzzle-solving, exploration, and videotapes. Also, the scares. The only real enemy in the demo is a single molded in the basement, which is the core enemy type in Resident Evil 7. And even then, access to this area in the demo came later, as the demo was expanded through updates as 2016 waned on. Extremely smart on Capcom's part, considering it got players to anxiously await new updates, allowed them to get feedback from players for the final game, and most importantly, kept Resident Evil 7 on consumer radars. That being said, Beginning Hour goes much more in the psychological horror direction than the final game. A lot of what happens in this demo is supernatural, like when the mannequins move whenever you look away. In order to complete the demo correctly, the player's expected to do a very specific set of actions, which allow them to escape without being infected by the molded in the basement. This includes finding the parts to a dummy hand and pointing it at specific locations in the house, after first finding a small handful of secret locations that lead to a mysterious cackle. Similar to PT, this stuff isn't easy to parse out alone, and feels more like it was intended to be a communal effort. Beyond all of this, the player's being haunted by a mysterious man who you can catch walking through the hallway at one point, and will assault you if you escape incorrectly.
Welcome to the family center.
Has since arguably become just as iconic of a line as,
"Where's everyone going? Bingo?"
from Resident Evil 4. The demo itself is a great showcase of what the team was going for with Resident Evil 7, without revealing everything. That being said, some people, myself included, were still a little apprehensive. Could they actually pull it off and make a true survival horror experience of this caliber? PT had set everyone's expectations extremely high, and Beginning Hour seemed to fall just short in comparison for a lot of players. Still commendable, but also still a shadow of what Silent Hills seemed to have been shooting for. What's more, there was no indication of the actual survival design that had made Resident Evil a household name. The game seemed to have a lot more in common with games like Outlast and Amnesia, and for a time, people wondered if it would even have any real combat at all. Would Resident Evil 7 end up being a 5-hour-long combination of a walking simulator and a puzzle game with some hiding mechanics, or could it actually end up being more like the early games in the series? Was this even in the same canon? If it was a reboot, would it keep all of the same themes or abandon everything? And if it wasn't a reboot, would it instead carry over all the baggage from the last 2 decades? Ultimately, Beginning Hour was a question, rather than an answer. More than anything, it left people asking, what would Resident Evil 7 actually be? This demo succeeded in so many ways, but could it stretch that out into a full game and add in the mechanics hardcore fans of the series so yearned for? Could it be as polished as it needed to be? By the time the final update came out, players didn't have long to wait to find out. Those of us who were avidly awaiting Resident Evil 7 made sure we got the best ending in Beginning Hour, so that we had access to the dirty coin it gave us, whatever that did. And then we waited. This demo set the tone for the future of Resident Evil, and for the future of AAA survival horror. When we next meet, we'll see if the final game could actually hold up against the promises made by Beginning Hour, or if Resident Evil was truly no longer concerned with returning to the ambitions with which it was created.